wars, internal conflicts, humanitarian crises to natural disasters. Journalists are on the forefront of reporting on these complex and difficult issues. While their work is critical in informing the world about the world events, the non-stop exposure to images of war, violence, and human suffering takes a mental and physical toll on them. Hello everyone, welcome to Our Voices. I am Semenyi Shekoye and I'm joined by my co-hosts Oriani Tangishaka and Ginny Niwa. Today, we will discuss about the unspoken truths of journalists' mental health. Hello, ladies.
Hi. Hello.
Well, you know, working in the newsroom is not an easy job, generally speaking. But when it's paired with, frequent reporting of traumatic and violent events, I'm sure it has its own toll on our mental health. And let's hear your experience. How does that feel? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it does definitely. We can't deny it because, we are working on amazing stories, but we're also working on stories that are full of sorrow, full of trauma, and that in a human being's mind can only affect you, if you let it affect you to a certain degree that you can control. But, in addition to that, you also deal with office politics. There's no office space that's perfect. So you also deal with office politics, the administration, and sometimes you feel undermined. You're not being recognized for going above and beyond, and that can also break you. So you have a lot of emotion that you have to go through as a journalist. And at times, sometimes I realize that I come into the office and I feel anxiety. What am I going to deal with today? Am I going to deal with the interview that's very sensitive? Am I going to deal with the administration that thinks I should do things this way, that way? And so it's a lot to deal with. But this is where the professionalism comes in, where you really have to just rise above the fray and just know to separate your work life and your personal life and just live your best life as much as you can.
And on top of that, there is also the online violence, which we'll also talk about later in the show. What about you, Ginny?
I think you said it right. You have to find a balance between having enough empathy to tell a story and to tell it just the way, it touched you, so you want, your audience to be touched. But at the same time, you have to set boundaries so you can continue to do that without, being traumatized, being, even scared of telling your stories because you have all these emotions that you have to deal with afterwards. And to me, that's, I think, personal. I can cover a story. I can have, people telling the story where, I'm fine with it. But when it comes to images, that's the one thing that I really have to be very mindful about what I watch, how long I watch it. I'm a mom, like children in pain, in war, that just tears me up. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's so true.
So,
that's really bad stories of children molestation, rape, and you're right.
I mean, I think I'm also one of those people who are increasingly getting overwhelmed with what we are reporting, with what we are watching. And unfortunately, the region I cover, which is the Horn of Africa, constantly deals with a lot of, protracted conflict, natural disasters, or political violence, which results a lot of human suffering, the ones you just described. And because of that, I have to do interviews, or I have to listen to interviews, or I have to look at images of, victims and survivors and the deceased. And afterwards, it's really, really hard for me to get that out of my system, out of my head. I sometimes replay, this description of how someone they loved was killed in front of them, how they were raped sometimes multiple times, and how, a lot of houses or homes were burned overnight. And I keep replaying that. And I personally, get drowned in all those pictures I consume every day.
It's also the feeling of feeling helpless.
Exactly. Yeah. I feel sometimes I'm not doing enough. Yeah. But what helps me, as you guys said, is that's where the professionality comes, right? Knowing that what we do and what we report gives voice to those people and helps get their story out is what keeps me sane. Yeah. And of course, we also have personal ways to deal with that.
Yeah, and the impact is there because sometimes we might feel like we're not impacting, but also just telling the story is bringing impact on the ground.
Yeah,
so.
Definitely. Sure. Yes. So as we mentioned in the beginning, day in and day out, journalists report on disturbing events from natural disasters, conflicts, famine to war. As a result, they frequently bear witnesses to significant human suffering and sometimes find themselves in situations where their lives are threatened. A research by Harvard University reveals that journalists often do their work dealing with uncertain working hours and worrying about the uncertain future of newsrooms. Journalists also face harassment and attack online and in person. The United Nations, in its recent report, found that 73% of women journalists experienced online violence in the course of their work. Such exposure to traumatic events leaves journalists to deal with increased stress, anxiety, depression, sleep and eating disorders, burnout, and post-traumatic stress disorder, which we call PTSD. According to the Dart Center for Journalism and Trauma, a project of the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, at least 80% of journalists have experienced or are exposed to work-related trauma. On this week's edition of Our Voices, we will explore how mental health is discussed in the media and why female journalists are at higher risk.
Right, well, racked by conflict and unrest, Burkina Faso is a tough environment for journalists with issues like rape, sexual violence, often a taboo. But Mariam Ouedraogo is pushing back to provide a platform through her reporting for those affected by unrest. While in Washington to receive an award, she spoke with VOA Salem Salman about her career. Let's take a look.
Based in the bustling capital of Burkina Faso, Mariam Ouedraogo is focused on her reporting for the French daily Citoyen. The Burkinabe journalist has built a career out of shedding light on oft-overlooked social issues that affect her community. In her coverage of education, health, and insecurity, she looks to how women, children, and people with disabilities are affected. Her drive, a desire to make a difference through journalism.
It's because I wanted to change things. I had this desire not to change the social order, but I was looking for a job that would allow me to have more impact, especially on social facts and the subjects surrounding us.
It's an approach that has earned the reporter national and international recognition, including a Knight Award presented in Washington in the fall. Each award, says Ouedraogo, is an opportunity to amplify the voices of those she reports on, including survivors of conflict and rape. Ouedraogo also broke new ground when honored with the Bayou Calvados Normandy Award for War Correspondence, the first African woman to win that award. Militant attacks in Ouedraogo's home country are increasing. The Africa Center for Strategic Studies, a research center focused on security, estimates that around 8,600 people will die due to extremist attacks by the end of this year, more than double the total last year. Instability in Burkina Faso drives a lot of Ouedraogo's reporting. She says the stories collected from survivors of rape, which extremists often use as a weapon, weigh heavy.
It's unimaginable what suffering they endured. The simple fact that she is sexually assaulted, and often by several people, and in front of everyone, sometimes under the gaze of children. It's traumatic, and it's another death. I call it another death.
Ouedraogo opened up about her struggles with what is commonly known as vicarious trauma, a form of post-traumatic stress.
It's as if I was being raped in their place, and I found myself in it without understanding anything. But each time I felt like I was receiving the blows. So that's what led me into this stress, into vicarious traumas that I carry with me until today.
Reporting can be tough in a country known for its restrictive media environment. Journalists face limitations on movement and societal taboos, especially topics like rape and sexuality.
We don't talk about it. This is why the victims remain silent. They don't like to tell stories because there is the view of society, not only are you a victim, but you will also be repudiated and stigmatized.
Describing her process of collecting these accounts as testimony, Ouedraogo encourages more women to become journalists, saying women bring unique perspectives to marginalized communities and emphasizing the potential of journalism to affect positive change. Salem Solomon, VOA News.
Well, for journalists like Mariam Ouedraogo, who are first responders and eyewitnesses to violent news events, trauma is viewed as a standard hazard that comes with the profession. While most journalists exhibit resilience, they are still at risk of developing PTSD. To discuss this further, we invited Nigerian investigative journalist Tobore Ovuorie, who risked her life to expose human trafficking and faced long-term consequences. Due to her work, she suffered assault, was forced to witness brutal murder, and came dangerously close to meeting the same fate herself. Ms. Tobore, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on the program.
Definitely. So you went undercover to expose criminal activities like prostitution, human smuggling, and organ trafficking. And two of them, the victims, were killed right in front of you. So tell us, what was that experience like, and how did it affect you afterwards?
The experience is something I'm still trying to suppress. I know that's not a healthy one, but I'm trying to put everything out of my mind completely. And it was horrendous. It's still horrendous because from time to time, I still do have flashbacks, and it's something I wouldn't want to ever witness nor wish it on somebody else. I would say I was lucky to have escaped. It wasn't a palatable experience at all.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in addition to that, in addition to witnessing, all these abuse, you yourself went through, some physical abuse. How were you able to overcome that and continue to cover the story?
To be honest, I wasn't able to overcome that. I simply, I wouldn't say simply, I had to suppress my emotions. At some point, I went numb. When I look back now, I would say that wasn't healthy. It wasn't a healthy choice, but that was what I had to do then. That was the experience I had then. I completely went numb. I was moving on to complete the story, to write the story. And of course, the consequence was me breaking down completely.
Yeah, I can imagine, and I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Hopefully, over time, there will be some healing so that you can continue to do what you love, which is journalism. So what would you tell other journalists who actually, are going through that right now, today, in wars? What would you advise them?
To my colleagues who are experiencing this, I will advise that you take things a day at a time, seek professional help, get psychological support. Although, to be honest, in Africa and especially the country where I come from, Nigeria, issues of mental health, even for journalists, are still being shrouded in secrecy. Um, you don't have to be ashamed. You don't have to be embarrassed. It was never your fault. It's not your fault. It will never be your fault. It's part of the hazard of the job. So seek psychological support. And this should be an opportunity to call on institutions and governments that this psychological support should be free. They should be made free and accessible. So for such colleagues, take it a day at a time and learn to take time off work. I understand the newsroom.
I want to stick on that point where you say it should be free. As a journalist on the continent, do you think that media houses are open to providing that assistance to their journalists, even though we are in a very taboo environment? There should be some advocacy there, don't you think?
There should be some advocacy there, but I dare to say that the media houses, they're not doing enough. They are not doing enough in that regard. And the media houses, if a journalist, even in the line of duty, comes down with, let's say, PTSD, anxiety, depression, instead of supporting the journalist, most of the time, they ease the person out or outrightly If they want to be kind, uh, they would write the journalist to put in his or her resignation, but a good number of times they simply just sack the person. The person's appointment is terminated, the contract is terminated. So I don't think they are ready yet. And that conversation really needs to be held, not just talking, but putting in the work.
Well, we'll continue our conversation with Nigerian journalist Ms. Tobore Ovuorie. It's now time for a quick break. When we come back, we will also hear from a specialist on mental health and media safety on how journalists can cope with covering difficult stories of horror. Before we go, we also would like you to share with us how you feel about the news and how it affects your life. Share your thoughts on our social media platform. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and X, and our handle is at VOA Africa. Use the hashtag VOA Our Voices. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain, and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
You're watching Our Voices. Welcome back. Today we're talking about how journalists' job affect their mental health. In addition to covering trauma and stress that comes with reporting hard news, journalists are also exposed to online violence, while anyone using social media is exposed to the cyber harassment, hate speech, stalking, and other violent threats. Research shows that journalists, especially women journalists, are disproportionately targeted by online violence. We're here with us on Skype. We have Tobore Ovuorie, who's a health editor and senior investigative journalist and mental health advocate, who is joining us from Lagos, Nigeria. Let me go straight into that very topic. We have been discussing this, and we're seeing research that shows that women are affected more than men mentally. Do you agree with that research, and what do you say about that?
I totally agree that women are affected more than men. The women journalists are affected more than men journalists. And it's not just online violence alone, even in person. For instance, Tuesday this week, that's June 25th, I was on the bus when a much more older woman came attacking me. And I know the reason she could attack me is because I am a female. If I were a male, she wouldn't dare do that. And she attacked me over my being a journalist. And not just attacking me, she assaulted me, bullied me, threatened me. And she didn't stop there. She made a promise that even if it takes her 20 years, she's going to track me, she's going to beat me, she's going to harm me, she's going to do all sorts to me. I do have auntie because at some point I had to get my phone out and I secretly recorded her. So we have female journalists being attacked online, in person. And unfortunately, it's not just men attacking us. Women, our fellow women, they do attack us. This happened to me just Tuesday this week. It's not palatable at all. It needs to stop.
I'm sorry you had to go through that. And yes, many journalists experience that. But now let's go, we have been discussing work-related traumatic events, but the question on how journalists can take care of themselves in order to preserve their health, as well as the motivation to their work, still remains. So let's listen from a health expert. Our colleagues at VOA spoke to Hannah Storm, co-founder of the Headline Network and a specialist in mental health and media safety. And this is what she said.
I think we've seen the conversation around mental health in journalism change quite significantly in the last couple of decades. We went from a situation where there were very many taboos, a lot of stigma around any admissions of vulnerability. This idea that we had to be really macho, any admission of vulnerability was an admission of failure, which is obviously wrong. So we've seen this change in conversation over the past couple of decades, really to the point where there's more of a realization in newsrooms that we need to address and acknowledge and normalize conversations around mental health and the impact of our work on us. And that can be across the whole spectrum, from witnessing and experiencing really violent experiences or trauma through to conversations about the other impact of our work and our personal lives on our mental health.
Yes, when you have a reporter covering, a war, or you're covering a very violent city, how do you address that, mental health at the same time balancing your work?
Sure, I think it's really important to acknowledge actually that mental health and mental safety and well-being is the other side of the coin from physical safety and physical health. We can't have one without the other. So this is about helping journalists feel more empowered, I suppose, to do their jobs because they're recognized that the mental health is important. There are a few different things, and I'd acknowledge that I'm a journalist by background and not a clinician. From speaking with hundreds of journalists the past few years and having had my own experience of post-traumatic stress, there are certain things that I think are, as we call them, protective. And I think one is a sense of understanding why we're doing our job. We're bearing witness. We're holding power to account. We're striving to end injustice. So that bearing witness is important. The other thing I'd say is that connecting with people who we trust, having a community around us who we can speak with about our mental health is super important too. From the newsroom leader side, I'd say that we need to kind of see this as a holistic conversation around physical safety and mental health, but also conversation around what do we do to support our journalists in advance? So what's the risk assessment like? How might they be impacted from mental health side? What are we doing to support them during the coverage of the story or during the situation? And what are we doing afterwards? And I think there's two more things which are really important to say is, one is it's normal for us to have a reaction to a difficult situation. It's our body and brain kind of going, this is weird, this is unacceptable, and dealing with that. So that's important to note. And it's also important to note that journalists are resilient. Data and research shows us that journalists are resilient. That doesn't mean that journalists are immune though.
I had the opportunity to talk to some of the survivors of the Capital Gazette shooting. This year is going to be 5 years since that incident occurred. And one of the things that one of the reporters mentioned was that he initially tried to block it. It was when he was going out to cover stories or to take photos, and he had to go out and cover a crime scene or this type of incident, he usually try to block it. Is that a good strategy or not?
I think everybody has different coping strategies. Like everybody has mental health, but has it in different ways, right? I think I would strongly encourage people to seek help if they feel they need to. I've been through therapy. I've been in therapy for many, many years. And I think being able to speak with somebody who's a clinician is super important. I would say that some news organisations are doing great stuff, fantastic stuff. They've got peer support networks, employee assistance programs, they offer therapy, they offer webinars and conversations, effective communication. But there are two other things I'd say. One is that I feel like, what makes journalism great is the sense of connection and sense of empathy. We connect with our sources and our stories, we amplify their experiences. Those same soft skills can be used within our newsrooms. We should have empathy and connection around our colleagues to simply ask them, how are you? Are you okay? Are you really okay? What worries me is we're losing people who are burnt out. We're losing people, diverse people, people from diverse backgrounds who we need in our newsrooms because they feel unheard and they feel marginalized and they feel unable to share their experiences. There's a lot of burnout happening, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of depression, but this is not a kind of negative thing that we need to be. So what I'm saying is, I guess, that journalism is a fantastic profession. We are resilient. We do have the tools to support us. We do have that kind of protective step back in terms of saying that, why are we doing this? We're doing this to bear witness. So I think that if we remind ourselves that, things are positive, but I do still think there's more work to be done in the mental health space.
These are good tips from Hannah Storm. Thank you so much. And Tobore, you received awards for your remarkable investigative reporting and for your resilience. And thank you so much for joining us to share your experience on how to deal trauma.
Yes, Tobore, congratulations.
Congratulations, yes. And keep doing your work. And for us, this is where we end our show. Our special thanks goes to, of course, Tobore Ovuorie, a Nigerian health editor and senior investigative journalist. It was a great pleasure having her. Be sure to watch our voices on the VOA website at voaafrica.com or on our YouTube channel, where you can catch up on the latest episodes and the world's top news stories. Last but not least, we thank our editorial and production team on our voices. We will see you again next week with another exciting program. Be sure to continue the conversation on our social media platforms. Until then, thank you so much.